Modern women aren't used to encountering a man whose sense of self isn't negotiable. Most men they meet bend immediately, adjusting tone, posture, opinions, even desires the moment they sense her approval slipping. It's almost automatic now, a survival instinct built from years of social pressure telling men that keeping a woman comfortable is the highest moral duty. And when she finally meets a man who simply doesn't operate in that framework, it throws her off in ways she can't articulate without sounding dramatic. She can lean into the same strategies that kept weaker men orbiting her, flirting mixed with indifference, warmth followed by coldness, the subtle wave of attention then withdrawal. But he doesn't respond the way the others do. He sees the behavior, not the illusion. And because he isn't invested in performing for her, the effect is disarming. This is the part Nietzsche understood better than any relationship guru alive today. Power shifts the moment one person realizes the other lacks the capacity to disturb their inner equilibrium. When a woman senses that she cannot shape a man's emotional state, something in her recalibrates, not in a submissive way, but in a startled way, like someone realizing the map they've been using is suddenly outdated. She has spent years in an environment where male attention was so cheap and abundant that she assumed influence was a birthright. Yet this particular man stands in front of her with a completely different posture toward the world, self-contained, unhurried, guided by his own internal directives rather than her reactions. And once she realizes this, she becomes more attentive, not because he's manipulating her, but because he represents a type of man she rarely encounters, a man whose value is not a performance but a consequence of his mind. Nietzsche would say he resembles the one who creates the standard rather than obeying it, and modern women respond to that instinctively. The man who seems least affected becomes the man she watches most closely, not because he's withholding affection for effect, but because his emotional independence forces her to confront her own. She might test him gently at first, almost out of habit. A delayed reply, a subtle jab, a calculated comment crafted to provoke a shift. Anything that would normally cause a man to lean in, adjust, or compensate. But when she sees that he acknowledges the behavior without bending to it, something inside her shifts. She isn't used to a dynamic where her emotional tactics register, but fail to create movement, and that subtle failure carves out a strange mix of curiosity and frustration. It's not hostility, it's the realization that she's dealing with someone who isn't in the arena she's used to controlling, and this is where the psychological shift begins. She starts watching him more closely, not because she's trying to dominate, but because she's trying to understand. She notices his calm during moments where other men would become defensive or eager. She picks up on the fact that he never raises his emotional temperature to match hers. He remains composed without becoming distant, present without becoming clingy, involved without becoming trapped. His steadiness feels foreign in a world saturated with volatility. Nietzsche believed that the strongest individuals are those who can hold themselves steady while others tremble. And this stability becomes the quiet engine of his influence. He's not trying to control her, he simply has no interest in being controlled. And oddly, this becomes the very thing that makes her gravitate toward him. A woman who's used to shaping men suddenly finds herself studying one instead, not because he's withholding, but because he exists in a different psychological climate. She may not voice it, but she feels something rare. The presence of a man whose world does not collapse around her reactions. In the modern dating landscape, that alone is enough to alter the power dynamic without a single aggressive move on his part. What unsettles her most isn't his confidence. Plenty of men project confidence. It's the unmistakable sense that he isn't living his life in anticipation of anyone's validation. There's no reach in his tone, no subtle pull for reassurance, no hidden agenda seeking emotional rewards. He listens without performing, speaks without persuading, and acts without broadcasting the intention behind his actions. This absence of need creates a kind of psychological space around him, and she feels it immediately, even if she can't explain why it affects her. In most interactions, she can sense the moment a man wants something from her. Attention, affection, approval, anything. And that sensing gives her leverage. Not malicious leverage, not conscious leverage, but leverage nonetheless. With this man, that moment never appears. She doesn't feel the shift where he starts adjusting himself to pull her closer. And because she never locates that moment, her usual instincts don't activate. She isn't preparing defenses, she isn't moderating her tone, she isn't constructing a controlled persona, she's simply observing, trying to understand the mechanics of someone who doesn't revolve around her in the ways she's used to. This is exactly what Nietzsche meant by a man who stands beyond good and evil, not morally indifferent, but immune to social choreography. He interacts with her as he interacts with anything else in life, by aligning with his internal compass, not the reactions of the crowd. And this is where the subtle imbalance begins to tilt. She finds herself responding to his presence with more awareness, not less. She measures her words more carefully, not because he intimidates her, but because she doesn't want to disrupt whatever rare dynamic is unfolding. He never raises his voice or asserts his dominance. He doesn't need to. A man who's genuinely self-directed controls more through what he doesn't react to than through what he enforces. If she's distant, he doesn't chase. If she's emotional, he doesn't mirror it. If she's unpredictable, he doesn't recalibrate himself around her. This neutrality isn't coldness, it's sovereignty. And in a world where volatility is the norm, sovereignty feels like gravity. Quiet, steady, impossible to compete with. She starts noticing things she normally overlooks. How he doesn't rush to fill silences, how he doesn't scramble to fix emotional moments that aren't his responsibility, how he speaks from conviction instead of anticipation. She realizes he relates to her the same way he relates to every challenge in his life, with a calm assessment rather than reactive emotion. Most women are accustomed to men who soften themselves the moment they feel attraction, but he becomes even more centered. Attraction doesn't destabilize him. It simply adds another variable he's willing to engage with, not surrender to. Modern dating has conditioned women to expect men to mold themselves for connection. This man doesn't mold, he clarifies. If something feels off, he says it plainly. If something doesn't align with his standards, he doesn't justify those standards or argue about them. He simply holds them, the same way he holds the rest of his life. And for a woman who's used to navigating emotional contradiction, this simplicity feels alarmingly rare. She may not admit it out loud, but she adjusts her behavior around him without thinking. She becomes more deliberate, less chaotic, more sincere, less performative. Not because he demands it, but because the energy he moves with naturally discourages anything artificial. When you're in the presence of someone who's built their identity on internal truth rather than external praise, your usual games feel strangely childish. She senses that immediately. And this is where the real control reveals itself, not in domination, but in influence born from internal coherence. Nietzsche believed that the superior man bends the world by refusing to let the world bend him, and she feels that principle every time she engages with him. His restraint carries more weight than another man's intensity. His refusal to be swayed communicates more strength than another man's insistence. His lack of need becomes the very thing that makes her want to understand him more deeply. Without intending to, he becomes the point she orbits, because he remains unmoved while everything around him adjusts. And in the modern dating landscape, full of noise, insecurity, performance, and volatility, a man who cannot be shifted becomes the rarest force of all. What ultimately pulls her into his gravitational field isn't a performance of strength, but the absence of performance altogether. She realizes, slowly, and then all at once, that he isn't positioning himself as an opponent to resist or a prize to chase. He is simply a man who exists with a clarity that most people never develop, and that clarity reorganizes the entire dynamic without a single word about control. Control never needs to be announced when it emerges naturally from the structure of someone's character. As time goes on, she becomes acutely aware of how different he is from the men she's known. They tried winning her by proving worth or demonstrating devotion. He doesn't operate anywhere near that mode. His life isn't oriented around romance, approval, or emotional negotiation. He carries himself like someone who has already wrestled with his own fears, ambitions, and insecurities, and refused to let any of them dictate his actions. There's a settledness in him, a kind of internal weight, and it's impossible to ignore. Nietzsche wrote that real power reveals itself in the ability to remain oneself in the presence of others, regardless of their expectations. This is precisely what she encounters. He doesn't inflate himself to impress her, nor does he shrink to accommodate her comfort. He stands exactly as he is, no adjustment, no performance, no subtle edits to become more palatable. And this authenticity, instead of repelling her, draws her in with an intensity she didn't anticipate. Women often talk about wanting a man who leads, but leadership is rarely what they actually encounter. What they encounter is overcompensation, men trying to look dominant instead of being grounded. This man doesn't impose direction. He simply follows the trajectory he already lives by, and she feels pulled into it because it's stronger than the chaotic alternatives she's used to. His life has direction even without her in it. That's what changes everything. Around him, she becomes more honest with herself. She can't use the strategies that worked on less centered men. They feel unnecessary and transparent. She finds herself speaking more plainly, expressing her thoughts without embellishment, staying present instead of performing. Not because she fears losing him, but because the space he creates encourages sincerity. His steadiness isn't a test, it's a mirror. It shows her where she stands and whether she's built on something real or on a persona crafted for the shallow attention economy. This is the Nietzschean truth modern dating avoids. A woman cannot truly connect with a man she can easily command. The relationship becomes a stage play. The intimacy becomes fragile. The respect evaporates quietly over time. What begins as excitement turns into contempt, not because she wants conflict, but because she wants polarity, and polarity can only exist when the man is anchored in something she can't move. When she meets a man who cannot be redirected by her moods, the energy shifts. She feels the difference instantly. His presence forces her to confront herself, and this confrontation is strangely stabilizing. She stops viewing him as someone to manage and starts seeing him as someone to align with. Not in submission, not in hierarchy, but in resonance. A man who manages himself makes it easy for a woman to relax into the dynamic instead of trying to control it. And the irony, the one truth nobody wants to admit, is that modern women don't crave dominance from men. They crave consistency. They crave a man whose internal world isn't dismantled by the noise of the external one. They crave someone who can remain centered when they are overwhelmed. They crave a man whose presence requires them to rise rather than descend into chaos. This isn't patriarchy. This isn't sexism. This is psychology. And Nietzsche understood it long before dating culture collapsed into contradiction. He believed that strength is not what a man shows others, it is what he refuses to surrender inside himself. When a modern woman encounters that kind of strength, her instinct is not rebellion, it's recalibration. She organizes herself around that presence because it gives her something rare, a feeling of direction in a world full of drift. That alignment is the real control, the quiet kind, the kind that isn't enforced but granted. And once she grants it, the dynamic becomes something neither of them has to negotiate or explain. It simply forms. So how do alpha men control modern women? By not needing to. By being the only men in the dating landscape who cannot be bent by affection, fear, approval, or pressure. By existing on terms that remain stable, whether a woman enters their life or leaves it. By embodying the one truth Nietzsche repeated across his writings. The one who has mastered himself needs no power over others. And that, more than dominance or bravado, is what makes her fall in line, not because he demands it, but because her instincts recognize the strength of a man who cannot be moved.